The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Oshkosh Media, the City of Oshkosh, or your video service provider.
Hello, my name is Edward Castor, and I'm here for another edition of Making Habit. I'm with my friend, Adam BellCorelli. Thanks for joining me, Adam.
Thanks for having me, Ed. I appreciate it.
No problem. And we're here tonight to talk about a couple of exciting things. Now,
I like to think so.
if you want to first talk about your nerve disorder, why you're in the chair, because I didn't even really know your story until Monday, so.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a neuromuscular disorder. It's a demyelinating neuropathy is the type of disorder it is. It's called Charcot-Marie Tooth. So it's where your brain sends messages to all the muscles and throughout your body.
Okay.
And every time the message from the brain goes from one nerve ending to the next, it gets mixed up, or some of them just get lost altogether.
Okay.
And so as the messages get sent back and forth, and our brains and our muscles send millions of messages constantly, all day long, throughout our lives, and if some of those messages get lost or mixed up, the message doesn't get all the way through the system. And so the muscles would normally be getting those messages saying, you're working, you're stretching, you're doing what you need to do to get stronger, but it won't get stronger. And then sometimes it'll be the message to, bend your knee or wiggle your toes, and that message will get lost. And so that just the action won't happen.
Or would something totally, bizarre happen?
So sometimes something bizarre will happen, like a twitch,
Okay.
or numbness.
Yeah, and you don't know
those
what
kinds of things.
you don't know what you don't know what causes it, right?
So we know what causes it, and that it's the signal being lost.
Okay.
But as far as Charcot-Marie Tooth,
Yeah.
we're not sure what initiates that, other than it's something.
Do you know if it's genetic at all?
It is genetic, but it's not guaranteed to be passed along
Okay.
each time.
Here's a question I'm wondering too.
Yeah.
Do both parents have to be carriers?
So that's the thing I don't know. It depends on a lot of things with the genetics, and then how those genes then get expressed.
Okay.
So yeah, there's not a ton of study because it's not a very common disorder.
Do you know if there's been any research done on it?
There is quite a bit of research done at the CMTA, which is the Charcot-Marie Tooth Association, and hospitals throughout the world that are doing some study on it.
Okay.
It's because it's a subgroup of muscular dystrophy,
Yeah.
and it used to be categorized under muscular dystrophy. A lot of that research has carried over into the CMT research.
Were your parents carriers?
So they must have been, but neither of them had the same expression of it that I have.
And is it more? I don't know if you know the answer to this, but is it more prevalent in males or females?
So there's not a distinction.
Okay.
One of the signs that I had when I was a kid is I had scoliosis.
Yeah.
And severe scoliosis of the curved spine. And that is more prevalent in females, but there's nothing else about it that is gendered one way or another.
Okay. And then when were you concerned? Because you kept falling down and you kept wondering why you kept falling.
Yes, so when I was 5 years old, my mom noticed my shoulders were uneven. When I was getting out of the bath one time, she was drying me off, and she noticed that my one shoulder was higher than the other one, which is a sign of scoliosis. And one of our neighbors had suggested that we go to check out Shriners Hospital in Chicago. We lived about an hour outside of Chicago.
Yeah.
And there was a Shriners Hospital for children in Oak Park that is a free hospital.
Okay.
and they specifically work with children with various disabilities and disorders. And we were lucky enough to get into it. And so when I was 5 years old, we started going to Shriners, and every 6 months, my mom and I would drive down there.
So what would you tell somebody, or what would you tell a parent that's maybe watching this, that's going through something like this, that maybe they don't know what the disorder is, but their child keeps falling, or what would you say to them?
I would say definitely have it checked out. Find out what, if it's the major categories. Is it bone? Is it muscle? Is it nerves? And those sorts of things, to find out exactly what it is, because parents are always a child's most valuable advocate when it comes to disabilities particularly.
Because I know with my CP, they just said, take Ed home, he'll be fine. But one of the signs that my mom noticed, and I wasn't diagnosed until 6 months later, but one of the signs that she kept noticing, I couldn't roll over, I couldn't sit up. And that's a sign of cerebral palsy. But then I had to get referred to Gillette because Marshfield didn't have enough doctors to specialize in that. So would your advice to find a specialized doctor if there is a specialized doctor?
Absolutely. To keep on advocating, because especially for an infant who can't advocate for themselves, it's up to the parents. And definitely feel empowered, because you are doing what's best for your child to get the treatment they need. Absolutely. And the more that you can take care of when they're young.
The earliest, the better, right?
The earliest, the better. But at the same time, know that even if there is a disability, and whether you know what it is or not, it doesn't change the way you can think about that child and what you can imagine they can one day become.
And how long were you dealing with this before you actually were diagnosed? So
for me, it was more of worrying about the scoliosis and the weakened feet. So I had surgery. So when I was 5 is when they first found the scoliosis. And when I was 11, then is when I had foot surgery, because my feet because of the weakened muscles, had started to curve in. So when I walked, my toes pointed toward each other.
Was it kind of almost like club foot in a way?
Sort of, except it was more related to the muscles than it was the bones or any of the other structure. And so I had surgery that changed where the tendons were in my feet and pulled my feet straight again, so that I didn't trip myself by stepping on my own toes, was the idea. And so I had that surgery in the summer of '89. And then in the winter of '89, I had my anterior and posterior spinal fusion, which is back surgery.
So did they put a rod in your back?
They put 2 rods in my back. So the first thing they did, I love telling this story. The first thing they do is they take out a rib. And they crush up the rib, and they use that as like silly putty.
Can I ask a silly question?
Yes, absolutely.
Does the rib regenerate itself?
It does not regenerate itself. Nope.
Hey, that was just a thought, because
absolutely.
You know how bones can kind of heal or break, or maybe grow a new one, or
doesn't grow a whole new one. They can repair themselves when they break. But the reason they take the rib out and use that is because when you are straighten out a spine with scoliosis, each of the vertebrae is a little bit crooked. They bend through development, because they're used to that curve. They grow, and so when you straighten it, there's little gaps. And so they use the Play-Doh,
the bone,
and the bone marrow and everything to fill that in. In a way that my body wouldn't reject it. They use my own bone.
So you have one less rib, huh?
And so I have one less rib and a really cool scar. And so when they put all the putty in around the vertebrae, and then they clamp it at the top and the bottom, and then it all is solid in between there, from the top all the way down to the bottom.
So, and then you had probably a few other surgeries to go along.
Well, those were my surgeries. After that, it became, my feet are fixed, my spine is straight. Why am I still falling down?
And you still didn't know, right?
And they still didn't know. And so...
What are some of the tests that they put you through that parents can hey, maybe this test will work because this, this kind of sounds like my child. So what kind of test did you go through, or what kind of test did they give you?
So one of the first things they do is an MRI.
Okay.
And they start to make sure there's no other constriction or restriction in the brain sending those signals, and that all those connections are working. Then they do different scans to make sure the nerves throughout the body are working. I had spent quite a bit of time as a kid in a little tube with a big magnet spinning around in there, a big loud clunking, and checking to make sure everything worked.
Did you ever feel like that movie Bubble Boy?
A little bit, almost. But so then what they ended up figuring out is, since everything else was working, they had to check the nerves. And so they do this test where they put one pin in, like a knitting needle,
to see if you can feel it, right?
Well, so they put one here and they put one down here.
Okay.
And then they send electrical shock through it, and they check how fast the signal makes it. So they do it on the arms, they do it on the legs, and it makes your finger twitch when they do it, because it's sending electrical signal through there.
Okay.
And so, but then they measure how fast it goes.
Yeah.
And if it's slower than what they expect, then they can start to say, okay, this is a nerve disorder. Then they narrow it down from there. And then they can do genetic testing and all that sort of thing.
So
that.
Is your Charcot-Marie Tooth, is it going to get worse, or is it stabilized?
So for me, because I'm an old man now, it's pretty stable. It's been stable for a few years.
Okay.
Generally, it's more, it affects people more as they're developing.
Okay.
And as the muscles are still growing and getting stronger or not.
So that's why you say the sooner they can get it diagnosed, the sooner they can get the test, the better, right?
Absolutely. There's a lot more options as you go through, and there are a lot more options now than there were back in the early 90s when I was going through.
I was even born in the 70s, and they didn't even have some of these tests when I was born.
Absolutely, yeah.
So prevention is the best thing you can do.
Well, prevention of
I mean, going
illness
going in and get it diagnosed by the right professional, right doctor.
Yes, diagnosis, and then continue to stay active.
And even if they tell you something and you still question, if you still have a doubt, go to another doctor. I mean, it might take you a few years before you get diagnosed. I mean, how long did it take you to get?
Well, so I was fortunate to be able to go through Shriners.
Okay.
Shriners is a teaching hospital.
But some parent might not always have that option.
They may not have that option, and it's really important, to be able to continue to advocate and do the research that you can to find out, because your child needs that advocate.
Speaking of advocate, now we're going to turn the table and we're going to talk about your nonprofit.
Yes, indeed.
Your 14 and 3 nonprofit for leadership. Why did you call it 14 and 3 nonprofit? So,
with 14 and 3, a leadership development nonprofit, I do work where I do motivational speaking and work with young professionals or old professionals that are looking to try something new and find a new strength. And I help them figure out what it is that they're good at, where their strengths lie.
Not what they can do, but what they can do.
Absolutely, what they can do, but also what they want to do.
Okay.
What are people passionate about? Where do they put their energies right now? And what gives them energy?
Do you think some people just look at the cost and be like, that costs too much money, I'm never going to be able to do that?
For? Like
if they want to start their own business or something? Because things are very costly. It's not just cheap,
Yeah. I do think people worry about the finances
or
of things.
Or they might not think they have the strength of the inner person that they are.
That's often, I think, the more common case is people make up or come up with reasons to justify whatever their fear is.
And how can you help them with that?
So the biggest thing that I do is partly through my own story and the obstacles that I've overcome, but also I do it mostly by listening to what it is people are afraid of and what they love to do.
What do you think people's number one fear is?
Failure. Otherwise, the statistics say it's public speaking.
But if you don't fail, then you can't succeed, because you have to at least try to fail. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you have to put the effort in there to try, because if you don't try something, and if something doesn't work out, then you go to plan B or C.
Right. Or you keep trying that thing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
You're never done until you give up.
no.
So, yeah.
So what inspired you to do your own nonprofit? What gave you the vision?
Yeah, so when I first got married and moved up here to Oshkosh,
Okay.
my wife worked at the university at UW Oshkosh, and I was fortunate enough to get a job as the academic advisor for the honors program
Okay.
on campus. And I did one-on-one advising for the honors students and loved it. It was a blast to be able to work with students and help them figure out what course their next part of their life was going to take.
Or what they wanted to do for their future.
Absolutely. And what I would always run into was students who were academically gifted. They weren't going to have a problem with that part of it. Mm-hmm. But they didn't ever question what it is their goal was.
And
It was often, my mom's a nurse, I'm going to be a nurse. Or
yeah, and do you think sometimes that they go on expectations? Well, my mom says I should be. My mom's a nurse, so therefore I should be a nurse. But then I don't have the self-confidence to tell her that I might want to try something different.
Absolutely. And people worry that whatever it is that they're going to school for has to be, in their mind, what they get their job in. And so one of the things that I would work on with students is helping them see that they're getting a liberal arts education.
Okay.
Because it makes them able to think about the world differently. Yeah. And if they take that lesson, they take all of those points to heart, then they're able to better make that decision of what career are they actually going to do that they're going to love doing 25 years from now.
Yeah. And through your research, through working with your students, what did you find out?
So the biggest thing I found out is that people want to do bigger things once they are not afraid of that bigger thing.
Okay.
And so then after I did academic advising, I went and got my master's degree in public administration from UW Oshkosh.
Okay.
And thought about going into the public sector and doing city management type work. And through that, ended up getting involved in a bunch of different committees around town, like the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Rethink through the Winnebago County Health Department that is focusing on social connectedness.
Yes.
And a number of other opportunities I've taken around town. And then I also had the opportunity to work in the geography department at UW Oshkosh for a while that allowed me to work on maps and figure out how to take data and show it in a visual form. And I also got the chance to work in the Career Services office. So while I was working in the Career Services office at UW Oshkosh as an intern, I was able to start working on resumes with students. And I fell in love with it. Okay. Because for me, I look at resumes as a way to show where your strengths lie.
Okay.
How do you tell someone how great you are? Mm-hmm. How do you tell someone the awesome things you learn?
Because you have to be your own salesman, don't you?
You do. You got to sell your brand, absolutely. You got to live your brand and keep on reminding people of what that is. Mm-hmm. But the funny thing about resumes is almost everyone hates writing them. Because we generally think of resumes as a list of places that we've either quit or been fired from. Because we just write them as a timeline of this is the work I did. But I always try and get people to think about it a little bit differently.
How do you get people to think about it?
Instead of thinking of it as this list of bad places or places you didn't want to be anymore, I help people think about the lesson they learned. What's the skill they developed in that job? And what's the transferableness and the transferable skill that's going to help them in their next job?
Not if they didn't like the job or not. It's just
whether they liked it or not, because every job has something you're not going to like about it.
Yeah.
But if you think about how you're developing, how you're growing, and taking those opportunities to expand your knowledge base and your abilities, you're going to become a better person than you were when you started each experience, and then be able to transfer that into something that's even closer to what you really want to be doing.
Okay. And sometimes it all depends on who you connect with at work. Like, let's say you work with an with an employee, and down the road that they might start their own business and they might want you, or they might say, hey, I knew you were interested in this. It's all about who you know. They always tell us that in college. It's all about who you know.
I won't say it's all about who you know.
Well, it's a big part of who you know.
It is. It's important to make connections, absolutely.
Yes.
But even more important than that is being someone worth knowing. Because even if you know all the right people, and if you haven't convinced others or shown others that you're someone that they want to be around, that they want involved in their business or their nonprofit or their endeavor, whatever they're doing with their committee, just knowing them isn't going to help you. But being the kind of person.
And I bet you some people think that they have to change themselves in order to change the mold of where they fit.
Yep. And for me, I never think of it as changing yourself.
Yeah.
To me, it's more of the, have you ever heard the analogy of a sculptor who looks at a block of marble?
Yes, and they can use their imagination on what they want that marble to be.
They can use their imagination, but also the way it's often described is, I'm not sculpting, I'm just taking away the parts that aren't needed.
Yeah.
And so if I take away this chunk from myself,
kind of like the edges or whatever,
and chip away the edges, you take off and say, that is something I can release, I can let go of, I don't need that. And so it's not so much changing as much as becoming. And you become who you're meant to be eventually.
And because every day we change and we learn different skills, different things. We meet different people.
Every good day we learn something, yes.
So.
And then every bad day we learn twice as much.
Yeah. So what would you tell a young professional that's in college now, or maybe an old professional that's out of college? What would you tell them if they're looking for a job, or, what would be the 5 key things you would tell them?
So for me,
or more than 5.
Okay, I'll see if I can come up with 5, and then go from there.
Yeah.
So the first thing I'd say is know your own strengths.
Okay.
Know what you're great at, and start sort of focusing on events and skills that you've developed that accentuate and tell people about those strengths.
Okay.
Number 2 would be have specific examples of things you have done, that you've been a part of, that you've led or followed in, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a business venture, whether it's work in any field. Specific examples that show you using that skill and that ability and that strength. Let's see. Number 3 would be coming up with a list of things that bring you more energy.
Okay.
Things that when you do them, you can really get passionate about.
And they make you feel really good.
And they make you feel good because those are the kinds of things that you're going to put more of your energy in.
Okay.
So then the opposite of that would be the next thing, is know what drains your energy. Because there are often things we have to do in any business.
But we may not like doing them.
But we may not like doing them. But if they need to get done and if they're essential, we have to find a way to get them done. Okay. And so the more that we can explain to someone that we are aware, we have self-awareness of our limitations and it may not even be a limitation at that point. It may just be the things we're not wild about. We have to also then explain to someone else the strategies we use to overcome that. And how we overcome that barrier says a lot about us.
Sometimes young professionals and old professionals aren't good about expressing themselves. Like let's say if they're talking to you, they're not good about pulling some of those good things out. So sometimes you feel like you have to pull some things out of the people you meet with.
Absolutely. So a lot of the time, it's people feel like they're bragging.
Yes.
They feel like, oh, I shouldn't be so up on myself. I shouldn't.
For example, you didn't know
Yes.
you didn't know this about me, but back in 2000 something, I actually helped UW Oshkosh get an accessible radio station.
Oh yeah.
Because WRST was not accessible at the time, and I met with, you probably don't remember Joe Baggett, but it was
Yeah.
a long time ago when he worked here. I was having trouble getting up there, and they were supposed to provide like people to lift me up there, but they would never show up, and so I would have friends come and help me out,
Yeah.
and I almost got in trouble with the university because of liability and whatnot. So I eventually went to like a self-advocacy right thing in Chicago, and
Yeah.
they took a picture of the studio, and thanks to me that they have a brand new studio that's like 5 years old now, but
Absolutely.
I never told you that the other day.
Yeah. No.
So
There's no doubt in my mind. You make changes wherever you go, Ed. You're that kind of guy.
yeah, so you can, if you see something, remember what their old saying is, if you see something and you want it changed, is to have that voice. It's so important to,
Yep.
and you probably agree with me, is to have that voice, because change can start with one person, and then it can really, is that why you started this nonprofit too?
So that's
It's 'cause
part of it.
You wanted to change?
Yes. So then one of the other experiences I had was doing business consulting.
Okay.
And going into businesses and doing the talks and motivational work with individuals, either one-to-one or small groups, and working on changing the culture of the organization to be more aware and inclusive and supportive of one another.
Okay.
But what I found was a lot of those services, when they're offered in the professional world, are really expensive.
Okay.
And the people who can most benefit from them often can't afford them.
Yes.
So I combined that with my TEDx Oshkosh speaking experience and thought, how cool would it be if I started a nonprofit that the organization could be run with speaker fees, but then the individual consulting and one-to-one work could be done pro bono, so that someone who really needed it.
So are you thinking about offering classes sometime? I mean, someday too?
Absolutely. And so there are a few programs I've been exploring throughout the community
Okay.
to be able to offer small group education and one-to-one work that I can just do right now out of my home and meet at different coffee shops around town.
Yeah.
But I also then do speaking for companies where I will come in and do leadership development trainings for them.
How do you think your nonprofit will make Oshkosh full of more inclusion? You know, like make Oshkosh better.
Yep. I really hope it does make Oshkosh better and the whole Fox Valley region, because I think the more that people are aware of what their own strengths are, the more they want to do good things with those strengths.
But you think it's you think we fear ourselves, so that's why we don't explore? We don't explore?
So in my TEDx talk, one of the quotes I have in there is Marianne Williamson.
Mm-hmm.
And her quote is, "It's not our light, not our darkness, but our light that most frightens us."
Okay.
We ask ourselves, who am I not to be great? Who am I not to be beautiful? Who am I not to be, that thing, that great thing? And then she goes on in there to say, we are all children of God, meant to shine and meant to do great things in there. And there's a whole good quote in there that I'm forgetting at the moment, but it's that idea of, we're absolutely afraid of success.
And with our last 50 seconds here, do you think if you weren't physically challenged that you wouldn't be doing this, or do you think?
I think that definitely influences a lot of what I've always done in my life.
Yeah.
I think that's influenced the impact and it's influenced how I live my life and what I've been able to accomplish.
All right. Well, this is Edward Kastner for Making It Happen. And just remember to always have that voice, because it's key, because one person can help change the world, can help change your city. Thanks for joining me, Adam.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Ed.
All right.